Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Today, I am going to take you into one of the most breathtaking true stories ever told. The story of a woman who ruled an empire, loved two of the most powerful men in the ancient world, and chose her own destiny, even in death. This is the story of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt. It is a tale of power, danger, romance, and unbreakable will. Get comfortable, open your ears, and let this story carry you back more than 2,000 years. This is also perfect for practicing your English listening. So relax, follow along, and enjoy every single moment. Chapter 1. A Princess Born into Danger. More than 2,000 years ago, in the year 69 BCE, a baby girl opened her eyes for the first time in the great city of Alexandria, Egypt. Her name was Cleopatra, and though nobody could have known it then, she would one day become one of the most unforgettable rulers the world has ever seen. But long before the crown, before the fame, she was simply a child growing up inside a palace filled with secrets. Cleopatra belonged to the Ptolemaic family, a line of rulers who had governed Egypt for centuries. Yet interestingly, her family was not originally Egyptian at all. They were Greek. Her ancestor, a general who had served under Alexander the Great, took control of Egypt after Alexander's death and started this royal bloodline. So although Cleopatra ruled Egyptian land, her roots stretched back to Greece. Her father was King Ptolemy XII, and while historians still debate who exactly her mother was, most agree she came from within the same royal family. Life inside the palace looked glamorous from the outside. Fine silks, golden jewelry, servants at every corner. But underneath the shine was constant tension. Royal families in that era were famous for turning against one another. Brothers plotted against sisters. Children schemed against parents. Power was worth killing for, and Cleopatra learned this harsh lesson early. What made young Cleopatra different from other royal children was her hunger for knowledge. At a time when most women were never given an education, Cleopatra threw herself into learning. She mastered several languages: Greek, Egyptian, Latin, and even Hebrew, among others. Some accounts suggest she may have spoken close to a dozen languages fluently, an extraordinary achievement for anyone in the ancient world, let alone a young princess. She didn't stop there. She studied philosophy, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and the art of governing nations. Her tutors were amazed at how quickly she absorbed new ideas, and it is said she could debate scholars twice her age without losing confidence. She understood, even as a girl, that a ruler who is only beautiful will be forgotten, but a ruler who is brilliant will be remembered forever. Cleopatra also spent hours listening to merchants, travelers, and diplomats who passed through Alexandria, a city famous for its enormous library and its position as a crossroads of the ancient world. From these conversations, she learned about distant lands, foreign customs, and the shifting balance of power across the Mediterranean. This early exposure to the wider world shaped her into a ruler who thought far beyond the borders of Egypt alone. And she was not only intelligent, she was magnetic. Those who met her described a woman whose voice alone could hold a room captive, whose presence made people lean in and listen, and whose confidence made even seasoned diplomats take her seriously despite her young age. Yet her childhood carried its share of heartbreak too. Her father was seen as a weak king, criticized for wasteful spending and for failing to protect Egypt's interests from outside threats. More than once, the family was forced to flee the kingdom simply to stay alive, seeking shelter in foreign lands until it was safe to return. Cleopatra understood from a young age that wearing a crown did not guarantee safety. It often invited danger, jealousy, and betrayal from the very people closest to the throne. When she was around 14, tragedy struck. Her mother vanished from the historical record entirely. Some believe she died naturally. Others suspect she was murdered in a palace power struggle. Not long after, her father's health began to fail. Cleopatra, still a teenager, suddenly found herself standing at the edge of the throne, forced to grow up far faster than any young girl should. What truly set Cleopatra apart from the rulers before her was her genuine respect for Egyptian culture. Even though her blood was Greek, she was the first in her family's long dynasty to actually learn the Egyptian language fluently, and she embraced Egyptian religion, even presenting herself publicly as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. This connection with her people would later become one of her greatest strengths. By the time she reached young adulthood, Cleopatra was ready to claim her place, but she had no idea just how difficult that fight would become. Chapter 2. The Battle for the Throne. Stay with me, because this next part is where Cleopatra's true courage begins to shine. When her father passed away, his will named Cleopatra, now 18 years old, as ruler of Egypt. But there was a catch. She was ordered to share power with her much younger brother, a boy of only 10. In ancient Egypt, sibling co-rulers were not unusual, but Cleopatra had no intention of splitting her authority with a child who had never studied a single lesson in leadership. At first, she tried to cooperate, but behind the scenes, the boy's advisors were plotting against her. They didn't want a sharp, educated woman controlling Egypt. They wanted a puppet king they could manipulate freely, someone too young to question their decisions. Slowly but surely, Cleopatra was pushed out of the palace entirely, isolated from her own court, and cut off from the resources she needed to rule. Imagine that, a rightful queen, stripped of her throne, forced to flee into the harsh desert, with nothing but a handful of loyal followers, no army, no palace, no guarantee she would ever return. Under the scorching sun, sleeping in makeshift camps, she had every reason to give up hope, yet she refused. But Cleopatra was not the type to accept defeat quietly. While hiding in exile, she began plotting her comeback. She understood she couldn't reclaim Egypt alone. She needed a powerful ally, and fast. Fortunately, fate delivered one right to her doorstep. A legendary Roman military commander named Julius Caesar had just arrived in Egypt, and Cleopatra saw her opening. The problem was getting to him without her enemies finding out. Guards loyal to her brother patrolled every entrance of the palace, watching for any sign of her return. She could not simply march through the front gates, so she devised one of the boldest entrances in recorded history. Late one night, a loyal servant rolled Cleopatra tightly inside a large rug, tied it securely, and carried it past the unsuspecting guards, directly into Caesar's private chambers, as though delivering a simple gift. When the rug was finally unrolled at his feet, out stepped Cleopatra, poised, radiant, and utterly unforgettable. Her eyes locked confidently on the most powerful man in the room. She spoke to Caesar with confidence and razor-sharp intelligence, describing her struggles, her love for her homeland, and her vision for Egypt's future. Caesar was captivated, not merely by her beauty, but by her mind. He agreed to back her claim to the throne. Together, their combined forces crushed her brother's army, and Cleopatra was restored as Queen of Egypt. But regaining her crown was only the beginning. Cleopatra wanted far more than survival. She wanted Egypt to thrive again as a respected, powerful nation. Working alongside Caesar, she reformed trade policies, strengthened the economy, and built a strategic partnership between Egypt and Rome that would shape the years ahead. Chapter 3: Cleopatra and Julius Caesar. Now that Cleopatra sat firmly on her throne again, her story shifted from a battle for survival into something far more complicated, a story of romance intertwined tightly with politics. After crushing her brother's rebellion, Cleopatra had become the most powerful figure in Egypt. But she knew that keeping Caesar close could help secure her country's future on the world stage. The two spent long stretches of time together. Cleopatra respected Caesar's brilliance as a military strategist and his commanding presence, while Caesar found himself drawn to Cleopatra's sharp intellect and undeniable charisma. Despite a large age gap, Caesar was over 50 while Cleopatra was still in her early 20s. A powerful bond formed between them. He remained in Egypt at her invitation, and together they toured Alexandria, sailed along the Nile, and discussed grand plans for the future. On these long river journeys, Cleopatra would point out Egypt's ancient temples and monuments, explaining their history and meaning, while Caesar listened intently, fascinated by a civilization far older than his own. Caesar quickly realized that Egypt was far more than desert sand and ancient monuments. It was a wealthy, sophisticated civilization with enormous potential and an ally worth protecting. During this period, Cleopatra became pregnant, and in 47 BCE she gave birth to a son. She named him after his father, though history remembers him by his nickname, meaning Little Caesar. Cleopatra dreamed that this child would one day unite the two great powers of Rome and Egypt into a single unstoppable empire. Sadly, happiness rarely lasts long in this story. Many powerful Romans grew uneasy, watching their leader grow so close to a foreign queen. Rumors spread that Cleopatra was manipulating Caesar to seize control of Rome itself. When Caesar eventually returned home, he refused to leave Cleopatra behind. Instead, he invited her to join him. Fearless as always, she accepted, arriving in Rome with a magnificent procession of gold, exotic animals, and Egyptian splendor, designed to leave the Romans breathless. She lived comfortably in a lavish villa, attended elite gatherings, and even influenced Roman fashion trends with her distinctly Egyptian style. But not everyone welcomed her warmly. Many Roman women resented her confidence and her refusal to blend quietly into the background. While Cleopatra observed from Rome, Caesar's political power reached new heights. He was declared dictator for life, giving him near total control over the Roman world. Cleopatra hoped this meant stability for their alliance. Instead, it triggered disaster. Roman senators, terrified of Caesar's growing dominance, began conspiring against him. In 44 BCE, tragedy struck. Julius Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators inside the Roman Senate itself, stabbed to death in a shocking act that stunned the entire world. Cleopatra was devastated. She had lost not only her closest ally, but the father of her child. Understanding that her safety in Rome could no longer be guaranteed, she quickly gathered her son, her servants, and her belongings, and fled back to the safety of Egypt. Back home, Cleopatra refused to let grief paralyze her. She mourned Caesar, but continued ruling with strength and determination, rebuilding her military, boosting her economy, and preparing Egypt for whatever challenges lay ahead. She poured everything into raising her son to become a capable future leader, teaching him strategy, diplomacy, and the true weight of responsibility that comes with wearing a crown. Deep down, though, she knew Egypt still stood in a vulnerable position, surrounded by the world's most dominant empire. She would need another powerful ally, and soon. Chapter 4. Cleopatra and Mark Antony. This next chapter gave us one of the greatest love stories the ancient world has ever known. After Caesar's death, Rome fell into chaos, as several ambitious men fought for control of the empire. Among them was Mark Antony, a fearless soldier, a gifted leader, and a man known for his charm and confidence. Antony had heard countless stories about the dazzling Queen of Egypt, though the two had never actually met. He needed Egypt's wealth and resources to fund his military ambitions, while Cleopatra needed a strong Roman ally to shield her kingdom from Rome's expanding power. When Antony summoned her to meet him in the city of Tarsus, Cleopatra saw the perfect opportunity to make an entrance nobody would ever forget. She sailed into the harbor aboard a magnificent golden ship with silver oars and purple sails, dressed as the goddess of love and beauty, surrounded by attendants costumed as mythical figures, with the sweet fragrance of perfume drifting across the water and soft music echoing from the deck. Crowds gathered along the shoreline just to catch a glimpse of the spectacle, and word of her arrival spread through the city within minutes. When Antony laid eyes on her, he was completely spellbound. Her wit, her confidence, her sheer presence, he had never encountered anyone quite like her. That single meeting sparked one of history's most passionate relationships. Cleopatra welcomed Antony to Egypt, where the two enjoyed extravagant banquets, thrilling entertainment, and endless conversation. He fell deeply in love with her, and she with him. Together, they envisioned building a combined empire spanning both Rome and Egypt, believing that united, they could rule the entire known world. But their bond was never just romantic. It was strategic too. Antony needed Cleopatra's resources for his military campaigns, and Cleopatra needed his protection for her kingdom. Their relationship blossomed, and eventually they had 3 children together, twins first, followed by a younger son a few years later. Cleopatra raised them with the same rigorous education she herself had received as a child, believing that knowledge would prepare them for the responsibilities that awaited them. She dreamed that her children would one day inherit an empire greater than anything the world had ever seen, with territories stretching across the eastern Mediterranean. Of course, not everyone approved. Back in Rome, Antony's growing devotion to Cleopatra infuriated many, especially a rising political figure named Octavian, who happened to be Caesar's adopted heir and was determined to become the sole ruler of Rome. Octavian viewed Cleopatra as a dangerous threat, spreading rumors through the streets of Rome that she had bewitched Antony, drained his fortune, and stolen his loyalty away from his own homeland. Making matters worse, Antony was already married to Octavian's own sister, a marriage once arranged to keep peace between the two men. Yet he chose to remain devoted to Cleopatra instead, a decision that publicly humiliated Octavian's family and deepened the bitter rivalry brewing between them. Eventually, tensions boiled over into open war. Octavian officially declared Cleopatra and Antony enemies of Rome and prepared his forces for battle. Everything the two lovers had built together now hung dangerously in the balance. Chapter 5. The Final Battle and Cleopatra's Legacy. Now we reach the final and most emotional chapter of Cleopatra's extraordinary life. She and Antony stood together, ready to defend everything they had fought so hard to build. But this final chapter would be defined by heartbreak, misunderstanding, and one last act of unshakable courage. Octavian's army was disciplined, massive, and determined to end their reign for good. Still, Cleopatra and Antony refused to surrender without a fight. In 31 BCE, near the coast of Greece, their combined naval forces clashed with Octavian's fleet, in what became known as the Battle of Actium. The sea turned into chaos, burning ships, clashing swords, the roar of thousands of soldiers echoing across the waves. Midway through the battle, something unexpected happened. Cleopatra's fleet suddenly turned and sailed away toward open water. Some historians believe she was strategically retreating to preserve her ships and her treasury for a future fight, while others argue she sensed the battle was already lost and chose survival over a pointless death. Antony, confused and heartbroken, believed she had abandoned him entirely, and without her by his side, his focus shattered. Demoralized, his forces began collapsing, and Octavian's army secured a decisive victory that would change the course of the ancient world forever. Antony returned to Egypt shattered, desperate for answers. When the two finally reunited, Cleopatra explained she had never intended to betray him. She had only tried to protect what remained of their forces. Antony believed her, and their bond held strong, even as their enemies closed in from every direction. Octavian's forces pursued them all the way to Alexandria. Cleopatra and Antony fought valiantly to defend the city, but they were badly outnumbered. Realizing defeat was inevitable, Antony chose to fight one final battle, and lost. Believing false reports that Cleopatra had already died, he fell on his own sword in devastating grief. Moments later, he learned she was still alive. His servants carried his dying body to her, and the two shared their final moments together before he passed away in her arms. Alone now, Cleopatra understood exactly what awaited her if Octavian captured her alive. She would be dragged through the streets of Rome in chains, mocked and humiliated as a trophy of war for the crowds to jeer at. A queen of her pride and dignity could never accept such a fate. She spent her final hours writing letters, arranging her affairs, and ensuring her legacy would be remembered on her own terms rather than her enemies. So, in her final act as ruler, she dressed in her finest royal robes, adorned herself with her crown and treasured jewels, and, according to legend, allowed a venomous snake to end her life quietly and with dignity, rather than surrender her freedom to anyone. When Octavian's soldiers finally arrived, they found her lying peacefully, dignified even in death, shocked by her courage. Even her greatest enemy could not help but respect her final choice. With her passing, the ancient kingdom of Egypt came to an end, absorbed into the growing Roman Empire. Yet Cleopatra's story never truly ended there. Her legacy transformed into legend. She is remembered not simply as a beautiful queen, but as a brilliant strategist, a devoted mother, a fearless leader, and a woman who refused to let anyone else control her fate, not even in her final breath. Cleopatra's life reminds us that true strength isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about facing it head-on with intelligence, dignity, and unstoppable determination. She lost battles, she lost love, and eventually, she lost her kingdom. Yet she never lost herself. She proved more than 2,000 years ago that a woman could rule with both heart and mind, and that legacy still echoes through history today. So, my friends, let Cleopatra's incredible journey remind you of something powerful. No matter how difficult life becomes, you always have the strength to rise, to fight for what you believe in, and to write your own story on your own terms. If this story moved you, come join our growing community at WisdomLoom English. We bring these unforgettable true stories to life every single week to help you learn and grow through the power of storytelling. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next incredible story.